Welcome again to the September Integration Down Under. I just wanted to remind everybody of the organizers. We have Martin in Perth, Dan in Brisbane, Renee in Sydney, Wagner in Auckland, and myself in Melbourne. And tonight's talk is me, the Azure Claim Check Pipeline component for BizTalk. So basically part of the whole idea of moving some of your BizTalk to components to Azure. So we will go ahead and let me just swap slideshows here real quick. And basically we have our Azure pipeline claim check slides up and ready to go. So I am a cloud and platform evangelist for 6Pivot. I'm a Microsoft MVP since 2004. Microsoft certified trainer and certified solution expert in cloud platform and infrastructure. Tonight we're going to talk about my Azure Claim Check pipeline component that I have built for BizTalk. If you've been following my blog, I've also done some stuff around moving your BizTalk infrastructure to Azure. And one of the key components is this claim check pipeline component, because basically it helps that movement of the data from a logic app in Azure down to your BizTalk, and then from BizTalk back to that logic app. And why I decided to build a pipeline component. Basically, it's around the fact that the clients I'm working with at the moment around BizTalk that are looking at doing this have unpredictable message sizes. So if your message sizes were all small, you could get away with service bus and things like that. So, but the particular clients that I'm working with, they really don't know how big the message can be. And it basically varies greatly. Most of them are small, but there are a few that are exceptionally large. And yes, there are some alternatives to doing it this way. You could do a couple of different ways, but I decided I wanted to make it easy for these clients to implement. So basically I set off to build a claim check pipeline component. And the way I see this pipeline component helping you and working is from Azure. Basically, you'll take an inbound message, you'll get that into a logic app. The logic app will do mapping and things like that. So if you want to map from your client format to an internal format, you do that in the logic app. Then the logic app will write the resulting message out to Blob Storage. And then the logic app will send a message down to BizTalk that includes the URL to the blob. And the service bus message, the way I've crafted it, can also include some properties about the client and the message type. And again, the sample artifacts that I will show you in a few minutes are designed around just a sample. So you can modify this to fit your architecture. And then BizTalk picks the message up with the pipeline component. It goes off to and reads the service bus message, gets the URL to the storage account. I've got some configuration information in the pipeline component about the storage keys. It then goes out, grabs the blob storage, and replaces the message, the BizTalk message in the pipeline. Instead of being the service bus message, it's the actual contents of the blob storage. And then that's what goes into the pipeline. From that, basically the decode phase onwards. So it then just goes through the normal, if you want to use XML disassembler or flat file disassembler or EDI disassembler, whatever you want to use at that point, you can use, because the message is in BizTalk. Even if it happens to be a JSON message, you can put my pipeline component and then you put the JSON decoder and things like that. So you can do pretty much any standard stuff that you do in BizTalk. On the way out, it does a similar thing. We've got a send port with the send pipeline. The pipeline's got my component in it. And then basically that component will then send the message up to the storage. And then that message will, then it will send a service bus message up to the Logic app. The Logic app receives that message, goes out, pulls the data out of Blob Storage, basically does outbound mapping if you want to. So basically it can map from the client's format, from your internal format to the client's format, and then send it to the client however you want. The sample that I've got set up tonight basically sends it to me in an email. So not a lot of rocket science that I'm dealing with in the fact that I'm going out to an email. So the project is on GitHub, and it's basically BizTalk Bill, BizTalk Azure claim check. And the contents of the project is a Azure solution. I should have put on here, the Azure solution is a Visual Studio 2017. It's got some sample service bus, and I'm working on that still. I haven't got it completed. I want to be able to have you be able to deploy all this stuff from the project and set it up in a test mode so that you can do that. So at the moment, I've got everything through the service bus namespace, queues, topics, subscription, integration account, storage account, and the Key Vault stuff done. I'm working on now the Logic apps, the sample Logic apps that I have out there so that you can deploy all that. I have created both a BizTalk 2016 version of this and a BizTalk 2013 R2 version of this. I have been working mostly with the 2016 version, but the one client I'm working with that wants to use this is 2013 R2, so I will be making sure I do all the testing and things like that on the 2013 R2 version. Now, I don't have a lot of slides. We're going to go look at code now. So basically, I'm going to look at the 2016 code to start with. And basically what I have is I have a project out there that includes BDDF deployment. So it will deploy to your BizTalk environment. I've got the actual pipeline component. We'll go through that. I have some sample artifacts. So I've done very creative naming here. Client 1, message 1, client 1, message 2, client 1, message 3. So just a fairly generic setup of some messaging. I've got 3 maps too. I've got a client 1, message 1 to internal message 1, client 1, message 2 to internal message 2, and then internal message 3 to client message 3. Or client 1, message 3, just so some samples. Again, you don't have to deploy those. I do have some BizTalk artifacts that you probably do want to deploy. One of those is the claim checks properties. So basically, or actually no, it's the service bus message properties. So I've got client ID, message type ID, and I pass a couple of other things down from the Logic app in that. I also have some sample pipeline components. So basically you can see here that I have a, I just need to check something here. Let me just do something real quick. No. I have some samples. So if the one I'll be using, I think, is just a claim check receive pipeline. It doesn't do anything with it. I'm just bringing it down into BizTalk. So I've got my claim check pipeline component, and then I've got some other ones that are set up as an XML receive. So the only thing different you really see in this case is you see that I have my pipeline component. I have an XML disassembler, an XML validator, and a party resolver. The JSON one, if we look at that, is the claim check component to pull the file out of the storage account. And then I've got the JSON decoder, an XML disassembler, an XML validator, and a party resolver. These are only just sample pipeline components I'm shipping with the product, so you can use these as a sample of what you want to do. We might as well go look at the code now. So basically what I've done is it's just standard pipeline component structure. And basically what I have is it can only, I've limited this pipeline component to only be in the encode or decode phase of the pipeline, because that's really the only place it can live. And then basically, I've got some properties, and we'll look at the properties in a second, but what I've got is, I'll go down here and open, that's not the one. Here we go. It's got an execute method. So if you're familiar at all with pipeline components, this is basically where everything happens. And basically, the approach that I've taken to this is I've tried to make it as generic as possible. And even to that point, I've got the same pipeline component that can be in the send pipeline or the receive pipeline. And the way that I did that is I found a little trick about it. It knows what stage of the pipeline it's in. So if it's in one of these stages, it's receive. If it's in one of these stages, it's send. So that was an easy way to get around that. Then basically, if I'm in the receive phase, I'm going to pull out the message from the service bus, because if we look in BizTalk, just real quick, and look at our receive location, the to BizTalk from that is a service bus adapter. So it's basically listening on a service bus queue. And then basically the message comes in. I tried to do a little bit of flexibility in this. And one of the things that I did was I put in support for Key Vault, so that you could have the credentials for your storage account in Key Vault. So basically it checks to see if they're there and then goes off and gets Key Vault. Then it also basically sets up the context properties, because it gets those from the service bus messaging. And then what I then try to do is to figure out what payload you sent me in service bus. And I probably should have kept this a little simpler than I did, but what I decided to do is, I'm a real fan of Event Grid. So I actually allowed this thing to take an Event Grid message. So you can push the message that you get from Event Grid when a blob is stored in the Blob Storage account. You can get the Event Grid message in your Logic app, and you can pass that Event Grid message through if you want to. And it knows how to decode the Event Grid message, find the storage location, pull that storage, the file out of storage. Or you can just send it a very basic string, text string. And that text string can either be the full URL to the storage account, or it can be just the relative path. And what it does is it counts on, if it's a relative path, it counts on you having the storage account name and everything in the pipeline component configuration. Once I do that, then basically I go through here and I create the file name and things like that from the storage account. I parse out the string of that. Then I basically go out and do the code to grab the blob into a memory stream. I poke that memory stream into the BizTalk stream. So replace the stream that was the service bus message with the actual contents of the blob storage. I set some context properties, and that's it for the receive. And what we can see, if I go out here to BizTalk and I open up my receive location here, and I look at my Azure Claim Check receive pipeline, we'll see that we have the pipeline component in there. And I can hard code the client ID and the message type ID. So if I only have a single one coming in, I can hard code them in there. But if I don't put them in, it'll try to get them from the service bus message. And then what I've got is I've got the storage account name, and then I've got the storage account key. If I don't specify the storage account key, and I do specify the key vault client ID, client secret, and client suffix, it will go to key vault to retrieve the storage account key. And it makes it up. The key vault will be the client ID, the message type ID, and then storage key on the end of that. So that way, if you have strict security requirements on those accounts and things like that, the security people can put those into key vault, and you basically don't have to worry about them. You just pull them back with the pipeline component. The other ones that aren't filled in are the outbound container and outbound file name, because this is an inbound. So basically, and then I also did a enable true and false, so you can be able to, if you're having trouble with the service bus message, you can actually disable this pipeline component, and you'll see exactly what the service bus message is that's coming in. So let's go look at the send real quick and go back to the code. Again, the send is very similar to this, is that I've got some properties in there. One of them is the file name that I want to give it. Basically, it checks if it's got the storage key. If not, it goes off and gets key vault. And then basically goes in there, takes the stream that's inside of BizTalk, the BizTalk message, and then uploads that to the storage account, and then basically sets some service bus context properties for client ID and message ID, and sends the message. And that message, if we look at the BizTalk send port, it's basically going out service bus, and basically it's got the claim check there. And what I've done is, in that outbound file name, I've allowed you to put the BizTalk macros in there. So if you put %message ID, % and then whatever, that's what it will use for the name of the file that in the storage account. And then basically I give it the storage container and the storage account key. Again, these will apply up here too. The key vault one will only be used if you don't specify the storage account key. And I'm also hard coding the client ID and message ID in this particular send port. Because typically what I've seen is a lot of people have multiple send ports for the messages they're going out. So I can do that. And then basically I've just got some simple setups in here that go through how I would send. I just pick a message up off the file system and do that. Now, one of the things that I want to do as this project goes on a little bit further, and again, if I get some people that want to help out with some of these things, is that as part of my BizTalk project, I would love to be able to automatically upload these schemas and maps into the integration account. So I'm working on ways to do that, because what I'll do is I'll swap over to Azure now, or actually let's look at the BizTalk first. So I've got this Azure claim check BizTalk application. This is the sample one that I ship, and basically doesn't have any orchestrations, doesn't have any roles, groups. It's got a send port. So basically it's got a couple of send ports. There's a to BizTalk audit. So that's just where it writes the files out that come down from Azure. And again, this would be where you would push them into whatever process you have inside of your BizTalk. For me, I'm just dropping them out into a audit directory to go look at them. So basically, and it's very simple sample at this point. And then I have a couple of receive ports, and that is to BizTalk or from BizTalk. And so if we look at the receive locations, the to BizTalk is the service bus that's going out to Azure to get that service bus message, to get the location of the storage blob to download it. The from BizTalk is basically just picking it up in a local directory, and there's a send port here that is from BizTalk that writes it out to the service bus, to the storage account, and then the service bus message that goes out from there. Let's see what else. Does anybody have questions? Because you can type questions into the question window if you would like, if you have any questions or anything like that. So I'll give everybody just a second on the questions. And again, feel free to hit me on Twitter or Bill Chesnut at 6pivot.com.au. You can hit me on there. Do I keep any properties when I replace the stream? At the moment, I keep whatever properties were there. I don't really replace them. I think if I go back to the code, so what I do is client ID and message ID might have already been there from the service bus, but I just rewrite those. I do add these other properties to that, but basically I don't remove any of the context properties. So basically I just add to the context. So, and again, the code's going to be available. So if you really want to do something like remove some of the context properties or anything like that, you can do that, all of that, if you need to. Okay, so what is the maximum size of an XML message on service bus once it's base 64 encoded? The service bus message is 256K in standard and 1 meg, I think, in premium. It's not that big, but I mean, if you know that your messages are all going to be smaller than that, then you could get away with putting them in just straight in service bus and not have to do the claim check. You could also, if you really wanted to play with it, is basically zip up the message, stick it in service bus, and bring it down to BizTalk, and then unzip it. So you would get it, because XML zips pretty well. But basically, it's 256K and a meg. So it's not as big as some of the messages that I knew I was going to get. So that's why I ended up having this kind of a solution. So let's go, and I think I had one more slide that basically said, let's go run it and see how it works. So now let's go into Azure. And so what I want to do is go in here to Azure, and I want to go to the that's not the right logic app. Okay. Just slide this screen over. And this is the logic apps that I have. Let me go to this resource group, because basically what I've got is I've got all of the things in a particular resource group. So I've got application insights tied up to that. I'm not going to do anything with that. I do have a key vault. I have an integration account. So let's start off looking at that integration account, because we're actually applying some BizTalk maps to that. So that is taken care of. So I've got some schemas. So I've uploaded those schemas. Client 1, message 1, client 1, message 2, client 1, message 3, and then internal message 1, 2, and 3. So I've uploaded those schemas into the integration account. I've got those maps that I showed you too. So basically, client 1, message 1 to internal message 1, client 1, message 2 to internal message 2, and then internal message 3 to client message 3, client 1, message 3. So that's basically all I've got in the integration account, is those schemas and maps. Now, if your map uses any helper assemblies, you would upload those into the assembly section. So it does support that now. So basically, that's all we're using the integration account for. Then basically, what I've got is, actually, if we go look at Key Vault, we'll see that I've got a secret in Key Vault. So I go in here and look, and I've got client 1, message 1, storage key, client 1, message 2, storage key. These are some older ones I was doing some testing with, but that's the 2 that you need for this if you want to use the Key Vault for this. And what I do is I use a service principal to access the Key Vault from my Logic apps and from BizTalk. So then I've got the service bus namespace. And for this example, what I've done with the service bus namespace is I've got a queue, and that queue is to BizTalk. So basically I use one queue for all of the messages going to BizTalk. If you wanted to have a different receive port for the different message types, you could have a topic and subscriptions. And then when I send messages from BizTalk, I have a topic from BizTalk, and that topic from BizTalk then also has some subscriptions. So client 1, message 1, client 1, message 2, client 1, message 3. The only one that's really required in the scenario that I'm dealing with at the moment is the client 1, message 3, because that's the only outbound message. So basically when I put that on, and what that kicks off is the appropriate Logic app when that message comes in. Now, I took an interesting approach with this too, is I've got some event grid stuff in there. And then my storage account, let's have a quick look at the storage account. Biggest XML I've done with this. I haven't really done any load testing on it yet, Mark, but what I'll do is I can try I'll try some big files over the next couple of weeks and see how I go, and I'll tweet out the results of that. So it'll just be a matter of how fast your internet connection can pull down that storage. It shouldn't really cause any problem with the pipeline component, because the BizTalk pipeline will handle a pretty good size message. Now, what I did in the storage account is in the Blob Storage, I set up a series of containers. I've set a archive container up so that I can archive my in and outs. It's doing ins now, so and then I did come on. And then I've got a from BizTalk and a to BizTalk. So to BizTalk has got a couple of inbound ones. I've been playing around with some ideas on how I want to do this particular stuff. And what I've decided on is I've got 2 different patterns that I've got Logic apps for, and we'll have a look at those in a minute. And then again, with the outbound, I have a from BizTalk, and then I write those in there with the directory structure. So if it's client 1, message 3, that's what you would see in the storage account. But as soon as I consume that message and delete it, basically that folder disappears from the container. So that's a little bit of a trick that you have to understand there. And so that's the storage account. And again, you just decide how you want to do your archive and things like that, and that's a little bit up to you. So let's go back now to the resource group. So what we'll look at is the first of my 2 BizTalks. So I have a 2 BizTalk event grid map, event grid service bus, client message 1. So this is a little bit of a complex one, but we'll look at this Logic app. And again, these Logic apps are just samples. You could do anything you want to with these Logic apps. So what I do is at the moment, I'm using Event Grid to kick off this Logic app. So basically what I say is that when a file is created in the BizTalk to Azure POC storage account, I then have a filter here that says blob service default container to BizTalk blobs client 1 message 1. So this particular logic app will only get kicked off when a message goes into that folder, the client 1 message 1 folder, and then basically has an extension of .xml. And then basically I archive the inbound message. So basically I do a bit of replacing on that, and I write it out to the archive, and then I get the blob contents. So I read that in, and then I validate. So basically I'm using the client 1 message 1 schema to validate, and then I apply the map. So this is my client 1 message 1 to internal message 1. And then just to be extra cautious, I then also take and validate the output against my internal message 1. So before I leave the logic app, I know I have a good message. And in this particular case, what I'm doing is writing it to another storage location that is inbound client 1 message 1. This file came from just to BizTalk client 1 message 1. Now it goes into the inbound folder, and then I delete the original blob. So I delete the one from client 1 message 1. And what this one does is I use a second logic app. And let's go look at that logic app real quick. And that is basically to BizTalk event grid inbound. And what that does is it goes out here and it kicks off with a event grid message. So, and it's a little bit different in this case. It's basically looking at the same storage account, but in the filter, it's to BizTalk blobs inbound. So anything that's in that inbound folder. And I don't even restrict the filter. It basically anything. Then what I found a little bit of a problem is that if you write the blob with a logic app, you actually get 2 event grid messages. You get a put blob or create blob, and then you also get a put block list. So what I had to do is I had to do a little bit of a conditional on here that basically threw out the first one, so that we only get when it's a put block list, because I get a put block list only when I upload from like the browser, upload into a storage account from the browser. And then basically what I do is I'm sending the message down to service bus. In this particular case, this is where I'm leveraging the fact that I can send a event grid message. So the body of this service bus mount message is an event grid message. So that's one sample that I did. The other sample is a little bit simpler, and that's the event grid to map to service bus for client 1 message 2. So this does everything in a single logic app. And basically what this does is pretty much the same thing as the other one. It just got a couple extra steps in it. So I've got a event grid resource here that's looking for client 1 message 2, .xml, archives the inbound, gets the blob, validates it, applies a map, validates the output, creates a variable, which is my inbound file name, writes the result to the storage account, and then picks up the name of that inbound file and the location I wrote it to, and basically sets those context properties in the service bus message. sends that service bus message and deletes the original blob, which would be at client 1 message 2, and where this one has the output has been sent to that to BizTalk inbound service bus. And then that message goes down to BizTalk. So that's the 2 inbound scenarios that I've built logic apps for. So what we can do now is, let me go find the other browser. So what I've got is, let me close this a little bit. And so we will basically go in here, go to our to BizTalk folder. And you'll see if I go to client 1, there's nothing underneath that. So basically, I'll just go from this level. I'll do an upload. I'll go select the file. So I've got my client 1 message 1. And I'm going to go in the advanced properties here, and I'm going to put this in a client 1/message 1 folder. So that'll trigger the appropriate logic app to run. And so that's there. If we go back and look at our logic app, so that's going to have triggered this logic app. So if we go and open up this logic app, that is if the browser's awake and cooperating. Okay, so maybe not. Let's go back over to this other browser window. So client 1, message 1, okay, yep. And now we look at the run history, 7:38 p.m. So we can go here and look. And if you haven't seen Event Grid, this is a good example of an Event Grid message that you'll see. So here's the event received. And if we look at the raw output of the Event Grid receive, what we'll see is basically it's a blob create. And then basically down here is the URL of the blob that got created. So basically that's kicking off my logic app. And then I do a archive of that. So it's going out to, that's pulling in that guy and it's sending it to the, can't see the archive location on that because for some reason. Then I get the blob contents. So that's, you can see that's the XML document, client 1, message 1, XML. And then I do the validate, that succeeded. Then I apply the map, and then I do the validate. And then I write the results out to a storage, and then I delete that original blob. And that didn't send the service bus message. So what that did is that dropped it into a storage location, and then another logic app got launched, and that's the to BizTalk Event Grid inbound. And we should see that have the same date timestamp, so 7:38. And we'll see that there was actually 2 of them that ran at 7:38. So the first one is the one that did the, it failed that condition because it wasn't a put block list. But then the second one that ran is a true. So it basically went down there and took this original event grid message. So if we go look down there at the event grid message here, we'll see that is HTTPS BizTalk Azure POC inbound client to BizTalk inbound client 1 message 1, and then a GUID, and then client 1 message 1.xml. So that's the file it needs to pick up, and then basically I just put that into the service bus straight like that. And then let's go down and we can look at BizTalk. So if we go here to BizTalk, to the group hub, and look at the track service instances. So at 7:38, we saw the claim check receive, execute, and then a pass-through transmit pipeline go out. And then if we go look in the audit folder, we'll see at 7:38 is the internal message one that it mapped to inside of the logic app and basically executed. So that's the first example of those. And if we go now and look at the second example, what I'll do is I'll upload another message. This time it's going to be the client message 2, client 1 message 2, and I need to put that into the client 1 message 2 folder and upload. And then we'll go here and go back to the, I must have closed that other browser window. Let's just go here and do a portal Azure.com. Go to my logic apps real quick. And this is the one that ran the message 2 one. And then basically there's a 7:43 message. I only got one this time because I'm only running a single logic app. So basically I go down through there and I do the same stuff. So I get the event, I write the blob to the storage location, I send that message out to the BizTalk queue with the client 1 message 2 properties in it. And you can't really see the contents because it does a base 64 encode for you automatically in the logic app. But basically I've got some variables in there that I set up as the file name. So that's what the file name would be. It's got a GUID and then client 1 message 2.xml. And then let's go, and then that would have went down to BizTalk. So if I now open up BizTalk again and run this query again, you'll see at 7:43, there was another execution of that. If we go out to the audit folder, we'll see another message at 7:43, and that is internal message 2. So that would be the second message that we did from the other logic app. So that's the inbound. Two different ways you can do the logic app around the inbound stuff. And what I've got left is now to have a look at the actually I don't want to do that. So now what I want to do is I've got a folder out here that's from BizTalk, and what I'll do is I just need to go pick up the internal message 3. So I'm sending this message out. So I'll grab the external message 3. I'll copy that to my from BizTalk folder. I'll paste that in. BizTalk's picked it up. And if we see here, we'll see that we're running the Azure claim check send. And we've sent that message out to the service bus. And then now if we go back to our logic app, we can see that the from BizTalk client 1 message 3, and then we'll see the execution of that. And of course, in the demo gods were not happy with me, so we failed. So let's see what it failed on. Okay. So it actually did part of it. It failed on the get blob metadata. And let's see what error it got. Okay. I've got one little aspect of this that's a little bit funky. Okay, let me explain to you what it is. I didn't want to poll the service bus queue. Okay, because I run this very, very occasionally. Every time, if I have a get message off the service bus queue, if I have that running all the time, and I've got like a 5-minute polling window, I get billed for one action every 5 minutes to go pull that. So I did a little bit of funky stuff here, and I did use the event grid to kick off this logic app. Okay, and I did some testing earlier, and I changed some stuff around, which causes this complete message here to fail. Okay, I will mark. So, and that's why it failed this time, because it picked up the wrong message off of the queue. So the reason that I decided to use Event Grid to kick this off was that Event Grid is an HTTP webhook basically, and it only fires whenever there's something to process. If you use like FTP as your receive trigger, if you use a service bus queue or topic or subscription, something like that, and it will ask you for a polling interval. And basically every time that polling interval happens, you get charged for that poll. So if you have a logic app and it's polling every minute for a new message on the service bus queue, you will get charged for whatever is once a minute times 60 minutes times 24 hours. That's the minimum charge you're going to have, whether you process any data or not. For this demo, at least, I decided to, because I knew I was going to have something hit the storage queue. So then I was going to go out and grab the service bus message from that, just as a way to kick that off. If I've got a lot of messages coming through on a particular channel, I probably wouldn't have to bother with the event grid message, but it's just, I was just trying to get around that charge for polling. And again, other people that have done some work with around logic apps will see that what you could do, and it gets a little bit more complicated when you start looking at this, you can set an event grid on a service bus queue or topic, but you do also have to, it has to be premium service bus. So that costs you more money too. So it's kind of a trade-off at that point of what you want to do from there. But basically it was just a way to kick this off. Now this actually worked. And what I can do is I can go over here, and because this one basically sends the message out as an email. So let me just grab this email real quick. And I'll bring it over to the screen. So basically there's the client 1 message 3 output, and there's the file. And if I double click on that, okay. Yeah, okay, I'll open it. And of course it popped up on the wrong screen, didn't it? So there is the client 1 message 3 XML that's there. And basically I sent that out via email, but basically I could have done that through pretty much any mechanism. The client that I'm doing some work for here in Melbourne, we're going to basically send it out to an SFTP server, and then their clients are going to poll that SFTP server and pick up the file. So I got to figure out a way around this, because basically I had to change the topic of the subscription, because I did some changing on the namings of things after I got started. So, but basically that's why that failed. Actually, it failed one of them, but if you go next, it loops through each one of them, and it actually worked on that one, and that's the one that I got the message for, because there was multiple messages in the service bus queue for it. So it still worked. It failed at that point, but it still worked. So now if we go back just to the my GitHub repository, let's go back to GitHub. Okay, let me go back to GitHub via a different browser. So basically, this is what the GitHub project looked like. So I've got the Azure, and I've got the BizTalk 2013 and 2016. I've got some PowerShell scripts are part of my build process that I'm using. So that's why the PowerShell scripts are there. I'm working on the documentation. That's taking me longer than the actual code is the documentation, because it's markup, and I'm really not familiar with how markup works. I did want to show quickly the Azure stuff that I've done. So what I've done so far in Visual Studio, I've got a ARM template that basically deploys the it's got some parameters. So the location, the base name for everything, the name of the client one message, one client one message 2, 3, the service principal that I'm using, and the user object. Then I'm deploying a key vault. I'm deploying integration account. I'm deploying a service bus namespace, a storage account. Then I'm creating some storage containers. And then I'm creating some key vault secrets. And then I'm doing a authorization rule for service bus. I'm doing a queue, creating a queue in service bus. I'm creating a topic in service bus. I'm creating some subscriptions in service bus. I'm creating the subscription rules in service bus. And basically, and that's pretty much all that one is doing. And basically what you can do is I set up a set of parameters here that basically set my base name and the service principal and user object, because I'm deploying into a different subscription, and I can run that, and that will create all those artifacts for me in this example. And what I'm working on now is the same thing for each one of those logic apps. So so when I get finished with this, you'll be able to take this project out, go into Visual Studio 2017, go here and change the names of the things that you want to change, and run the sample up and have it ready to go. And then hopefully I'll also have the same thing for the logic apps. You'll be able to go in there and set your parameters and go through and deploy the logic apps to do the samples too. I have the way the project is set up in let me just get rid of that screen. In the BizTalk 2016, again, it's got a settings file. So if I go into, come on, yeah. If I go into Excel, I've got all of the pieces set up in here, all of the keys and everything in there for the pipeline component. So it can be automated in the deployment side of things, so that you can just go here and go tools, deploy, tools, deploy solution, and it'll deploy that into your BizTalk in the Azure claim check. And then that basically sets up the receive locations, so the service bus, and has all of the required values and stuff in there, and it gets those from your settings file. That's pretty much what I want to cover. Again, what I'm going to do now is part of that blog post series about moving from BizTalk to Azure integration is the next post on that's going to be how you set up the logic apps in Azure to send the messages down to BizTalk. And then the next one after that's going to be how you do from BizTalk up to Azure and out and mapping. So that's where I'll do some of that performance testing that Mark asked about before I do that blog post. But basically, that's what I've done. Again, you can go out there and have a look at that project now. I just haven't quite got it complete. All good intentions of having it done before this talk, but other things got in the way, as we all know. Is there any other questions that people have?
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Could you describe a scenario where it'd be advantageous to have your maps hosted in Logic Apps and an integration account as opposed to just hosting them in BizTalk for when you get the message, retrieve the message from storage for an incoming
So
message?
yeah, so one of the things that I've decided to do the mapping and stuff in Azure is because my Azure is a 24/7 application, and I could actually queue up those messages in a storage account if my BizTalk infrastructure is down. And then in the Logic app, I would put some information in there. So if when I validate the message and it fails validation, I would send back something to the customer saying it failed validation. If it fails validation after I do the map, I might send something back to the customer at that. But basically what I'm trying to do by doing the mapping in Azure is giving people some flexibility, because they may not want to write a BizTalk map. So you could use XSLT2, you can use XSLT3, or you could use the liquid templates to map in Azure before you get to BizTalk. So you've got a lot more flexibility at that point of what you map. And eventually what I'm hoping for people to do is that this is the first step of moving from BizTalk to Azure. So you would pull all your client mappings up to Azure. And then the next step that you would do is, once you have all the client mappings up there, whatever your backend systems you're talking to, you may expose as APIs through API management in Azure. And at that point in time, your Logic app, instead of using the service bus claim check, it would go straight to the APIs, and you would basically bypass BizTalk completely. So this claim check pattern of moving your client mapping and everything up into Azure is part of a phased approach to basically move to pure Azure integration as opposed to Azure and BizTalk. That
Yeah,
kind of what you were looking?
yeah, those are all great reasons. I suppose
So,
one other possible reason too is that if the message coming in is really big, but what you actually need from that is very small, by doing your mapping in the Logic app, then what you're storing and actually pumping into BizTalk is pretty small as well. So, it helps as well.
and it also, if you're running into capacity issues on your BizTalk server doing all the mapping, you won't run into those capacity issues on Azure, because it's a consumption-based service that the Logic apps is. So basically, you can take care of that scaling in Azure without having to buy beefier and beefier BizTalk infrastructure. And again, you can catch those errors before they get to BizTalk. So if the schemas aren't valid and things like that, those will fail in BizTalk or in the Logic app, as opposed to failing in BizTalk. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And again, BizTalk resources are becoming harder and harder to find, as we all know. And the Logic app side of things is more kind of almost mainstream .NET stuff now, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a Logic app. There is no reason that you couldn't do what I just did in a Logic app in an Azure function, say basically do C# to do your mapping, and then basically put the message into a storage account from an Azure function, write a message to the service bus in an Azure function. So it opens up a lot of possibilities at that point of how you want to do things. What about Logic App BizTalk connector and the BizTalk Logic App adapter to pass the messages? I have a fundamental problem of talking directly between BizTalk and Logic Apps with the connector. I think the connector should have really been to API management to drive that kind of stuff. And the other problem that I'm having, that the reason I did this instead, is that I have a 2013 R2 client that doesn't have the Logic Apps connector in that version. So I didn't have the luxury of being able to do that in the 2013 R2. And I was worried a little bit about the message size. I don't know what the restriction is on the message size of that connector. And again, the client also showed a lot of interest in being able to take their BizTalk offline, but still receive messages from the client. And if I was going directly from Logic Apps to BizTalk through the connectors, I don't think I can achieve that offline effect of that the service bus and storage accounts do. So let me just. So we've looked at the code, we've run it, and we've gone through some questions now. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to hit me on Twitter or through my email. And thank you very much. And again, if you have other questions, please just hit me up afterwards. So thank you very much.